On Christmas Day, I found my granddaughter Sophie trembling outside in the snow. Her lips blue, no jacket, no hat. Just a thin pair of pajamas clinging to her tiny frame as snowflakes clung to her lashes. The temperature had dropped to 19 degrees, and there she was, forgotten by those who should have protected her most. Inside the house, through frosted windows, I saw them all laughing. My son Daniel. My daughter-in-law Melissa. Her wealthy parents. Glasses of wine raised by the fireplace, music playing, laughter echoing while my precious Sophie stood abandoned in the bitter cold. I didn't knock. I wrapped Sophie in my coat, picked her up and kicked the door open with strength I didn't even know I had. Wine glasses froze midair. Melissa's jaw dropped. Daniel turned pale. I stared directly into their stunned faces and said just 6 words. You lost the right to family. My name is Eleanor Matthews. I'm 68 years old, and this is the story of how I saved my granddaughter's life, and in doing so, found my own voice again. I've spent my entire life being quiet, being reasonable, being the person who smooths things over rather than creates conflict. I worked 35 years as a nurse at County General, raising Daniel alone after his father walked out when he was just 3. We didn't have much, but we had each other, and I thought I'd taught him better values than this. But standing in that doorway, with Sophie's small body shivering against mine, I realized some silences can't be maintained. Some moments demand that you speak, even if your voice shakes, even if it means shattering the illusion of family you've desperately tried to hold together. Mom, Daniel started, rising from his seat. We didn't know you were coming today. That's what he focused on. Not his daughter's blue lips, not her bare feet on frozen ground, but my unexpected arrival. She wanted to play in the snow, Melissa said dismissively, smoothing her cashmere sweater. She was only out there for a minute. You're overreacting. Sophie's tiny fingers clutched my sweater. I could feel her trembling against me, and when I looked down, I saw tears frozen on her cheeks. A minute? I whispered, my voice dangerously low. Her hair is stiff with ice. Melissa's father, Richard, a man who'd never bothered to learn my first name despite 7 years of family gatherings, cleared his throat. Children need to learn consequences. She was throwing a tantrum about opening presents before breakfast. Time out is standard discipline. I felt something snap inside me, not like a twig breaking, but like a dam bursting. Years of swallowed words, of accepting subtle disrespect, of watching Daniel slowly transform into someone I didn't recognize. It all came flooding out. Time out? You call locking a 7-year-old outside in freezing temperatures a time out? My voice didn't rise, but it carried the weight of every maternal instinct I possessed. That's not discipline. That's abuse. The room fell silent. Melissa's mother, Barbara, clutched her pearls, literally clutched them as if my words were more offensive than their actions. I carried Sophie to the couch away from them and wrapped her in the throw blanket. Her little body was so cold that I could feel it through my clothes. I rubbed her arms and feet, my nurse's training kicking in as I assessed her for signs of frostbite. Grandma, she whispered, her voice small and scratchy. I'm sorry I was bad. Those words broke my heart into 1,000 pieces. I held her face between my hands. You weren't bad, sweetheart. You were never bad. Daniel approached cautiously, as if I were a wild animal he wasn't sure how to handle. Mom, you're blowing this out of proportion. Sophie exaggerates sometimes. Does she exaggerate this? I pulled up her pajama sleeve to reveal bruises on her upper arm, fingerprint bruises, the kind made when someone grabs too hard. Daniel's face went ashen. She falls a lot. Kids are clumsy. No, Daniel, I said, my voice steady despite the rage building inside me. These aren't from falls. You know that. Melissa stepped forward, wine glass still in hand. I think you should leave, Eleanor. This is our home and you're creating drama on Christmas. Sophie is fine. She always has been fine under our care. That's when Sophie spoke up, her voice small but clear. Mommy said Grandma isn't real family anymore. That's why I couldn't call you when I'm scared. The room went silent. Daniel couldn't look me in the eye. Melissa's parents exchanged glances that spoke volumes about what they thought of me, just the poor nurse who wasn't good enough to be part of their world. I stood up, Sophie still in my arms. I'm taking her with me. You can't do that, Melissa snapped. That's kidnapping. Call the police, I challenged, looking directly at my son. Call them and explain why your daughter was locked outside in freezing weather while you all drank wine by the fire. No one moved. No one spoke. That's what I thought, I said quietly. I turned to Sophie. Let's get your coat, sweetheart. We're going to have Christmas at Grandma's house. As I gathered Sophie's things, I noticed the lack of photos of me in their house. There were dozens of Melissa's family vacation pictures, professional portraits, candid shots. But none of me. None of Daniel's childhood. It was as if half of who he was had been erased. We left without anyone trying to stop us. Daniel stood in the doorway, conflict written across his face. But he said nothing as I buckled Sophie into my car. As we pulled away from their grand house with its twinkling Christmas lights, Sophie looked up at me. Are you mad at Daddy and Mommy? She asked. I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. I'm disappointed in their choices, but I'm not mad at you. I could never be mad at you. Will I see them again? The question hung in the air between us. I didn't have an answer that wouldn't scare her. Right now, we're going to go to my house, have some hot chocolate, and make sure you're warm. Everything else can wait until tomorrow. As we drove through the snow-covered streets, I glanced at Sophie in the rearview mirror. She was watching the snowflakes dance in the headlights, her expression somber but somehow lighter than before. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know what legal battles lay ahead. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I would never again be silent when someone I loved was suffering. Never again would I prioritize peace over protection. Sometimes family isn't who you're born to. It's who opens the door when others have locked you out in the cold. I wasn't always the kind of woman who kicks down doors. For most of my life, I was Eleanor the peacemaker. Eleanor, the one who understands. Eleanor who makes do with less, so others can have more. My little house in Pine Ridge, just outside of Maplewood, where Daniel and Melissa live, has been my home for 30 years. It's nothing like their sprawling Tudor with its manicured lawn and 3-car garage. Mine is a modest 2-bedroom with faded blue siding and a garden that blooms stubbornly every spring despite my inconsistent care. But it was always enough. It was always home. The night I brought Sophie back with me, I made up the spare bedroom that had once been Daniel's. I still had his old stuffed bear mister, Rumbles tucked away in the closet. Sophie clutched it to her chest as if it were a lifeline. Daddy had this? She asked, her eyes wide with wonder. He carried it everywhere until he was 8, I told her, smiling at the memory. He said Mr. Rumbles kept the bad dreams away. I have bad dreams sometimes, she whispered. I sat on the edge of the bed, studying her face. Sophie had Daniel's eyes deep brown with flecks of gold, but she had a wariness in them that my son never had at her age. Daniel had grown up secure in the knowledge that he was loved unconditionally. What had happened to make him forget that lesson? What kind of bad dreams, sweetheart? I asked gently. She looked down at Mr. Rumbles, picking at his worn ear. Dreams where no one can hear me. I yell and yell, but no sound comes out. My heart constricted. I hear you, Sophie. I will always hear you. After she fell asleep, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea gone cold, trying to make sense of what had happened. The Sophie I'd seen during my increasingly rare visits to their home had always seemed well-dressed, polite, a bit reserved. Had I missed the signs? Had I been so eager to believe everything was fine that I'd overlooked her suffering? My phone buzzed with text messages from Daniel. Mom, you can't just take Sophie. This is crazy. Bring her back now. Melissa is furious. Her parents are talking about lawyers. No apology. No concern for Sophie's well-being. Just worry about appearances and Melissa's anger. I texted back a single line. Call me when you're ready to talk about the bruises. The phone remained silent after that. In the morning, I made pancakes shaped like snowmen. Sophie ate 3, giggling as I added chocolate chip buttons and strawberry scarves. For a moment, she was just a child enjoying breakfast, not a little girl who had been locked outside in the freezing cold by her own parents. Grandma, she said suddenly, setting down her fork, am I staying with you forever? I chose my words carefully. You're staying with me for now, until we figure some things out with your mom and dad. Mommy doesn't like you, she said with the blunt honesty of children. She says you're common. The word stung, but I kept my expression neutral. People don't always have to like each other to be family. But they do have to be kind and respectful. Mommy says I have to be perfect because I'm a Harrington, Sophie continued, referring to Melissa's maiden name. She says Matthew's women don't understand about standards. Each revelation was another needle in my heart. How long had this been going on? How deeply had they tried to separate Sophie from half of her heritage from me? The doorbell rang, interrupting our conversation. Through the peephole, I saw Daniel standing on my porch, shoulders hunched against the cold, no coat despite the temperature. Punishing himself, perhaps, for what he'd allowed to happen to Sophie. "Stay here and finish your breakfast," I told Sophie. Squeezing her shoulder gently, I opened the door but didn't invite him in. "Is she okay?" he asked immediately, his voice ragged. He'd been crying. "She's eating pancakes," I replied, keeping my tone even. "Which is more than she was doing yesterday when she was locked outside your house." He flinched. "Mom, it wasn't like that. Melissa she gets overwhelmed sometimes. Sophie was having a tantrum, and Melissa needed a break. So she put a 7-year-old outside in freezing weather? Without a coat? It was just for a minute." "Don't," I cut him off. "Don't lie to me, Daniel. Not about this." He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made my chest ache. My little boy, lost somewhere inside this man I no longer recognized. "What do you want me to say?" he asked finally. "I want you to tell me why my granddaughter has bruises on her arms. I want you to explain why she thinks she has to be perfect because she's a Harrington. I want to understand how you could sit in that house drinking wine while your child was outside in the snow." He had no answer. Just stood there shivering on my porch, looking anywhere but at me. "She called for you, Daniel," I said softly. "She said she called for you and no one came." A tear slid down his cheek. "Melissa's parents were there. I didn't want to make a scene, and there it was. The truth I'd suspected but hadn't wanted to believe. My son had chosen acceptance from his in-laws over the safety of his own child. You need to go," I said quietly. "I can't talk to you right now without saying things we'll both regret." "You can't keep her from us," he said, a note of desperation in his voice. "She's our daughter, and she's my granddaughter. And right now, I'm the only one acting like her welfare matters." I met his eyes directly. "I raised you better than this, Daniel." "I know I did." As I closed the door, I caught a glimpse of Sophie standing in the hallway, Mr. Rumble's clutch to her chest, watching her father leave without even asking to see her. "Is Daddy mad at me?" she asked in a small voice. I knelt down to her level, brushing her hair from her face. "No, sweetheart. He's mad at himself. And he should be." That afternoon, my phone rang. It was Barbara Harrington, Melissa's mother. "Eleanor," she said, her voice dripping with false concern, "this has all gotten so out of hand. Richard and I think it would be best if you brought Sophie back today. We're all here, and we've got presents waiting. Children need routine, you know. Children need safety," I replied. "And love." "Are you implying we don't love our granddaughter?" Her voice turned icy. "Because I should remind you that Richard is a trustee at Maplewood Academy. Sophie's future education depends on maintaining certain family relationships. The threat was clear. Bring Sophie back, or her prestigious school placement would be jeopardized." "Thank you for clarifying where your priorities lie, Barbara," I said calmly. "I'll keep that in mind when I speak with Child Protective Services tomorrow." I hung up before she could respond, my hands shaking but my resolve stronger than ever. That night, as I tucked Sophie into bed, she looked up at me with those serious eyes. "Grandma, are you afraid of Mommy's parents?" "Everyone is afraid of them." I smoothed her hair back from her forehead. "No, sweetheart, I'm not afraid of them. There are much scarier things in this world than people with money and influence." "Like what?" "Like staying silent when someone you love is being hurt," I said, thinking of all the times I must have missed the signs. "That's the scariest thing of all." As I turned out the light, leaving just the glow of her nightlight, Sophie whispered, "I'm glad you kicked the door." "Grandma," in that moment, so was I. The next morning, I called Child Protective Services. It wasn't a decision I made lightly. For 68 years, I'd believed in handling family matters privately. But the bruises on Sophie's arms told a story that shouldn't remain behind closed doors. When the social worker, Ms. Delgado, arrived at my home, Sophie was coloring at the kitchen table. Her drawing showed 2 figures, a tall one and a small one standing under an umbrella in the rain. The taller figure was holding the umbrella over the smaller one, keeping her dry while getting soaked herself. "Is that you and your mom?" Ms. Delgado asked gently. Sophie shook her head. "That's me and Grandma. Mommy doesn't like to get wet." Ms. Delgado glanced at me, something knowing in her eyes. She'd been doing this job long enough to hear what children weren't saying as clearly as what they were. We spoke privately in my living room while Sophie continued coloring. I showed Ms. Delgado photos I'd taken of the bruises on Sophie's arms, told her about finding my granddaughter locked outside on Christmas Day. "Has there been a pattern of concerning behavior?" she asked, her voice professional but kind. I hesitated. I don't know. They've been limiting my visits for the past year. Every time I call, Melissa says they're busy. When I do see Sophie, it's always supervised. Never alone? Classic isolation, Ms. Delgado murmured, making notes. Often a sign of controlling behavior. I thought I was being paranoid, I admitted. Daniel, my son, he's always been a good boy. I couldn't believe he would allow... My voice trailed off. Couldn't believe or didn't want to believe. Had I ignored signs because acknowledging them would mean accepting that my son had failed as a father? That I had failed as a mother? Mrs. Matthews' emotional neglect and psychological abuse can be just as damaging as physical abuse. And often harder to prove, Ms. Delgado explained. But the bruises and the incident on Christmas Day are serious concerns. What happens now? I asked, feeling simultaneously relieved and terrified. We'll open an investigation. We'll interview both parents, visit the home, speak with Sophie's teachers. In the meantime, do you have any legal standing as her guardian? I shook my head. No, I'm just her grandmother. Then we need to move quickly to establish temporary emergency custody. The Harringtons have resources, and they may try to regain physical custody before our investigation is complete. She was right. By that afternoon, a police officer knocked on my door with Daniel and a man in an expensive suit standing behind him. Mrs. Matthews, the officer said politely, I have a report of a custody dispute. Mr. Matthews states that you took his daughter without permission. The man in the suit stepped forward. I'm James Whitaker, the Matthews family attorney. We're prepared to resolve this amicably, but Sophie needs to return home with her father immediately. I stood my ground, blocking the doorway. Officer, I've already filed a report with Child Protective Services. My granddaughter was found with unexplained bruises and was locked outside in freezing temperatures as punishment. The CPS investigation is ongoing. The officer looked uncomfortable. Is that true, Mr. Matthews? Daniel couldn't meet his eyes. My mother is exaggerating. Sophie was only outside for a minute. She's prone to bruising easily. I have photographs, I said firmly. And I'm not letting Sophie go anywhere until CPS completes their investigation. The lawyer whispered something to Daniel, who nodded reluctantly. We'll return with a court order, Mr. Whitaker said, his tone making it clear he was used to getting his way. The judge will not look kindly on a grandmother interfering with parental rights. After they left, I called Ms. Delgado in a panic. She arrived within the hour, bringing with her emergency temporary custody papers. They'll be back, she warned. Probably tomorrow with a court order. We need a judge to sign these tonight. What followed was a blur of activity and emergency hearing before a night court judge. Sophie sleeping on a courthouse bench with her head in my lap. Ms. Delgado presenting the evidence of possible abuse and neglect. Your Honor, Mr. Whitaker argued, this is a simple case of a grandmother overstepping boundaries. Mrs. Matthews has no evidence of ongoing abuse. Just one unfortunate incident on a holiday when emotions were running high. The judge, a stern woman with silver hair and sharp eyes, looked at the photographs of Sophie's bruises. Mr. Whitaker, I see a pattern of fingerprints on this child's arm. That's not an incident. That's someone grabbing a child hard enough to leave marks. She turned to me. Mrs. Matthews, are you prepared to provide temporary care for your granddaughter while this investigation proceeds? Yes, Your Honor, I said without hesitation. For as long as she needs me. The judge signed the emergency custody order, granting me temporary guardianship for 30 days while CPS completed their investigation. Mr. Matthews, she said to Daniel, who had remained silent throughout the proceedings, I strongly suggest you reflect on what's happening here. If these allegations are substantiated, you could lose your daughter permanently. As we left the courthouse, Sophie half asleep in my arms, Daniel approached us. Mom, he said, his voice breaking. Please don't do this. Melissa's furious. Her father is threatening to cut us off financially if this goes public. I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw a man I no longer recognized. When had money and status become more important to him than his own child's welfare? Daniel, I said quietly, if you're more worried about Richard Harrington's money than about the bruises on your daughter's arms, then you've already lost something far more valuable than financial support. You don't understand, he insisted. We have a certain lifestyle now. Expectations. And those expectations include locking a child outside in the snow? Grabbing her hard enough to leave bruises? He looked away. It's not like that all the time. How often is it like that, Daniel? Once is too many. As we walked to my car, Sophie stirred in my arms. Is Daddy coming with us? She asked sleepily. Not tonight, sweetheart, I replied, my heart breaking for her. But he knows where to find us when he's ready to make better choices. Back at home, I tucked Sophie into bed, my mind racing with all that had happened. How had we gotten here? My son, who had once been so kind, so principled, now standing by while his child was mistreated. Melissa, who had seemed merely cold when they first married, revealed as something far more concerning. And the Harringtons, using their wealth and influence to silence any criticism or complaint. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at old photographs Daniel as a little boy, grinning with a missing front tooth. Daniel at his high school graduation, proud in his cap and gown. Daniel on his wedding day, looking at Melissa with such hope and love. When had he lost himself? When had my kind-hearted boy, who used to rescue injured birds and give away his lunch money to kids who had none, become a man who would choose status over his child's safety? My phone lit up with a text message from an unknown number. This isn't over. You have no idea who you're dealing with. Richard Harrington, I placed the phone face down on the table. Let him threaten. Let him posture. I'd faced worse in my life than an angry rich man. I'd raised a child alone on a nurse's salary. I'd worked double shifts when Daniel needed braces. I'd gone without so he could have what he needed. I may not have had the Harringtons' money or connections, but I had something they clearly lacked: unconditional love for a child who needed protection. And I would move heaven and earth to give Sophie what I had always given Daniel, a home where she was safe, valued and heard, no matter what storm was gathering on the horizon. On the third day of Sophie's stay with me, we received a visitor. Melissa's younger sister, Caroline, stood on my doorstep, her expensive coat buttoned up to her chin, her eyes darting nervously as if expecting to be seen. Can I come in? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I shouldn't be here, but I need to talk to you about Sophie. I hesitated, then stepped aside to let her in. Sophie was napping, exhausted from the emotional toll of the past few days. Caroline perched on the edge of my sofa, looking out of place in my modest living room with its secondhand furniture and knitted throws. Unlike Melissa, who carried herself with cold confidence, Caroline seemed fragile, uncertain. They're saying horrible things about you, she began, twisting her hands in her lap. That you're mentally unstable. That you've always been jealous of Melissa and her family's success. That you're trying to steal Sophie because you're lonely. I wasn't surprised. And what do you think, Caroline? She met my eyes for the first time. I think my sister has issues. Issues our parents have enabled her entire life. Caroline reached into her purse and pulled out a flash drive. When Sophie was 5, I was staying with them for a weekend. I heard her crying in the middle of the night. Not just normal child crying, but the kind that makes your stomach turn. I went to check on her, and Melissa was standing over her bed, berating her for wetting the sheets. Calling her disgusting, worthless, my heart constricted. What did you do? I confronted Melissa the next day. She denied it, said Sophie was having a nightmare. Daniel backed her up. Caroline's voice cracked. But I didn't believe them. So I installed a nanny cam in Sophie's room the next time I visited. I told them it was a new Bluetooth speaker I was testing for work. She handed me the flash drive. 3 months of recordings. Mostly at night when Daniel was working late or traveling. Melissa. She's not well, Mrs. Matthews, and my parents would rather protect the family image than get her help. I held the flash drive, feeling its weight like a stone. Have you watched these? Caroline nodded, tears filling her eyes. Enough to know that what happened on Christmas wasn't an isolated incident. Enough to know I should have done something sooner. Why now? I asked. Why come forward now? Because they're going to destroy you in court if you don't have this. Richard has already called in favors with the judge assigned to your case. They're planning to paint you as a mentally unstable old woman having delusions about abuse. I wasn't surprised, but the confirmation still stung. Thank you for this, Caroline. It couldn't have been easy for you. She stood, adjusting her coat. My parents cut me off financially when I came out as gay 5 years ago. Melissa sided with them. I've been dead to them ever since. Her smile was sad. So I don't have much to lose by doing the right thing now. After Caroline left, I sat at my computer, steeling myself before plugging in the flash drive. What I saw broke my heart and strengthened my resolve in equal measure. Melissa, hissing threats when Sophie spilled juice on her dress. Melissa, yanking Sophie's arm when she didn't clean up her toys fast enough. Melissa, locking Sophie in her closet for timeout while she went out for the evening. And perhaps most chillingly, Melissa coaching Sophie on what to say if anyone asked about bruises or being disciplined. You tell them you fell. You tell them mommy takes good care of you. Or they'll take you away to a place where no one will ever love you. The next morning, I called Miss Delgado and showed her the videos. Her face remained professional, but I could see the anger in her eyes. This changes everything, she said. We need to notify the court immediately and update our petition. With this evidence, we can push for extended custody and mandatory psychiatric evaluation for Mrs. Matthews. By afternoon, the legal machinery was in motion. The judge ordered the videos reviewed by court-appointed experts and scheduled an emergency hearing for the following week. That evening, my doorbell rang again. This time it was Daniel alone, his face haggard with exhaustion. Can I see her? He asked, his voice hoarse. Please, Mom, just for a few minutes. I should have been angry. I should have turned him away. But the broken look in his eyes reminded me so much of when he was a little boy, lost and seeking comfort. She's in the backyard, I said, stepping aside. Playing with that old tire swing you used to love. Daniel walked through the house to the back door, then stood watching Sophie through the window. She was singing to herself, spinning slowly on the swing, her face tilted up to catch the late afternoon sun. When did I become this person? He whispered, more to himself than to me. When did I start looking the other way? I stood beside him, following his gaze to Sophie. I've been asking myself the same question. When did I stop seeing what was happening to my granddaughter? When did I become so afraid of being unwelcome that I stopped protecting her? Daniel's shoulders slumped. Melissa wasn't always like this. When we first met, she was different, kinder. People don't usually change completely, I said gently. They just become more of who they already were. He turned to me, his eyes red-rimmed. Caroline showed me the videos. All of them. Things I didn't know were happening when I wasn't home. His voice broke. What kind of father doesn't know his child is being abused in his own house? The kind who wanted to believe in a perfect life so badly that he couldn't see the cracks in the foundation, I answered, not unkindly. The question is, what are you going to do now that you know? Daniel pressed his forehead against the cool glass of the window. Melissa's parents have hired the best lawyer in the state. They're going to fight for custody. For control? And what are you going to fight for, Daniel? He was quiet for a long moment, watching as Sophie jumped off the swing and began picking dandelions from the grass. For the first time in years, he said finally, I'm going to fight for what's right instead of what's expected. He turned to me, resolution hardening his features. I'm filing for divorce, and I'm going to testify about everything I've seen and ignored in that house. The admission hung in the air between us, a promise, a commitment, a first step toward redemption. It won't be easy, I warned him. The Harringtons won't let go without a fight. I know, he said quietly. But neither will we. As if sensing our conversation, Sophie looked up at the window and saw her father. For a heartbeat, she hesitated, uncertainty crossing her face. Then she smiled a small, cautious smile and waved a dandelion in his direction. Daniel waved back, tears streaming down his face. Some bridges, once burned, can never be rebuilt the same way. But perhaps with time and truth and courage we could build something new, something stronger from the ashes of what had been destroyed. The courtroom was smaller than I'd imagined. Somehow I'd pictured high ceilings and imposing mahogany like in the movies. Instead, it was functional and plain beige walls, fluorescent lighting, uncomfortable wooden benches worn smooth by years of anxious families waiting for their futures to be decided. Sophie was with a court-appointed guardian today, a kind woman named Mrs. Chen who specialized in supporting children through difficult legal proceedings. I'd spent the morning reassuring Sophie that everything would be okay, even as my own stomach churned with uncertainty. All rise, the bailiff called as Judge Patrice Martinez entered the courtroom. I stood, smoothing down the navy blue dress I'd bought specially for today. It had cost nearly a week's worth of grocery money, but appearances mattered here. The Harringtons had taught me that, if nothing else. Richard and Barbara Harrington sat behind their attorney, Mr. Whitaker, both of them dressed impeccably. Barbara's pearls gleamed under the harsh lighting. Richard's gold watch flashed as he leaned over to whisper something to his lawyer. They didn't look in my direction. Melissa sat separately with her own attorney, a sharp-featured woman whose reputation for aggressive family law tactics had earned her the nickname the Barracuda. Melissa's face was composed, but I could see the tension in her jaw, the slight tremor in her hands as she arranged papers before her. Daniel sat beside me at our table, with Ms. Delgado and the court-appointed attorney who'd been assigned to represent Sophie's interests. In the week since he'd come to see Sophie, Daniel had moved out of the Harrington estate and into a small apartment. He'd filed for divorce and submitted an affidavit supporting my petition for custody. The Harringtons had retaliated swiftly. Richard had Daniel fired from the investment firm where he'd worked for the past decade, a firm owned by Richard's college roommate. The lease on Daniel's apartment had mysteriously been flagged for review. His credit card's joint accounts with Melissa had been canceled. "They're trying to break you," I'd told him the night before, as we sat at my kitchen table preparing for today. "To show you what life looks like without their money and connections." Daniel had looked up from the legal papers, a calm determination in his eyes I hadn't seen since he was young. "Let them try. I've lived without money before. I haven't lived without my self-respect in a very long time. Now," as Judge Martinez called the court to order, I reached over and squeezed his hand. "This is a hearing to determine temporary custody of minor child Sophie Matthews. Age 7, the judge began, reviewing the papers before her. "I've read the initial CPS report, the emergency custody order, and the supplemental evidence submitted by both parties." She looked up, her gaze direct. "I've also reviewed the video evidence submitted by Caroline Harrington." Melissa's head snapped up at the mention of her sister's name. Barbara Harrington whispered furiously to her husband, who silenced her with a sharp gesture. "Before we proceed, I want to be clear," Judge Martinez continued. "This court's primary concern is the welfare of the child, not family reputations, not financial considerations, just the safety and well-being of Sophie Matthews, the Kai." Hearing proceeded with formal presentations from each side. Mr. Whitaker painted a picture of me as an interfering grandmother who had manufactured abuse allegations out of jealousy and resentment toward my more successful daughter-in-law. He suggested that the bruises on Sophie's arms were from normal childhood play, that the Christmas incident had been a momentary lapse in judgment during a stressful holiday. "Mrs. Eleanor Matthews has a history of depression following her husband's abandonment," he stated smoothly, causing Daniel to stiffen beside me. "She has been increasingly isolated and fixated on her granddaughter, creating scenarios of abuse where none exist." When it was our turn, Ms. Delgado presented the evidence methodically, the photographs of Sophie's bruises, the testimony of a pediatrician who had examined her and found evidence of repeated grabbing injuries, statements from 2 of Sophie's teachers who had noted concerning behavior changes over the past year, and then the videos. As the first clip played on the courtroom monitor, showing Melissa screaming at Sophie for spilling a drink, then dragging her by the arm to a closet, Barbara Harrington audibly gasped. Richard's face remained impassive, but a muscle twitched in his jaw. Melissa's attorney quickly objected. "Your Honor, these videos were obtained illegally without my client's knowledge or consent. They constitute an invasion of privacy and should be inadmissible." Judge Martinez considered this. "Ordinarily, I might agree with you. However, when the welfare of a child is at stake, and when the videos were taken by someone with legitimate access to the home who had reasonable concern for the child's safety, I'm inclined to consider them." She looked directly at Melissa. "Unless your client wishes to explain her actions in these recordings?" Melissa conferred with her attorney, then stood. "Your Honor, I love my daughter. I would never intentionally harm her. What you're seeing are isolated incidents taken out of context during a very difficult period in my life. I was under tremendous stress, and were you under stress on Christmas Day as well, Mrs. Matthews?" The judge interrupted. "When your daughter was found outside in freezing temperatures without proper clothing?" Melissa's composure cracked slightly. "That was a misunderstanding. Sophie was being difficult. I asked her to get her coat, and she ran outside without it to be defiant." "That's not true," Daniel said, rising from his seat. All eyes turned to him. "Your Honor, may I speak?" The judge nodded. "What happened on Christmas Day wasn't a misunderstanding," Daniel continued, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his face. Melissa was annoyed that Sophie had interrupted the adults' conversation. She told Sophie to go outside until she could behave like a proper Harrington. I didn't stop her. I didn't check on my daughter. His voice broke. I have no excuse for that failure. None. Melissa stared at him, betrayal and fury in her eyes. Daniel, what are you doing? Telling the truth, he replied simply. Finally, Judge Martinez allowed Daniel to continue. He spoke for nearly 20 minutes, detailing patterns of emotional and physical mistreatment he had witnessed or suspected. He described how Melissa's behavior toward Sophie had worsened over time, how her parents had enabled and even encouraged strict discipline to ensure Sophie would uphold the Harrington family image. I was wrong, he concluded. I failed my daughter by prioritizing my marriage and my in-laws' approval over her well-being. I'm asking the court to grant temporary custody to my mother, a woman who has shown more courage and moral clarity than I have in years, while I work to become the father Sophie deserves. The courtroom was silent when he finished. Richard Harrington's face had turned an alarming shade of red. Barbara dabbed at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief, though whether from emotion or embarrassment was unclear. After a brief recess, during which I sat with Daniel in stunned silence at his public confession, Judge Martinez returned with her decision. Having reviewed all evidence and testimony, I find compelling reason to believe that Sophie Matthews has been subjected to emotional abuse and physical mistreatment in her parents' home. She looked directly at Melissa. Mrs. Matthews, I am ordering a full psychological evaluation before I will consider any visitation rights. Mr. Matthews, she turned to Daniel. Your honesty today speaks to your character, but it does not erase your failure to protect your child. You will undergo parenting classes and counseling if you wish to pursue custody in the future. She turned to me. Mrs. Eleanor Matthews, the court grants you temporary custody of Sophie for a period of 6 months, during which time CPS will conduct regular home visits, and Sophie will continue with her court-appointed therapist. Relief flooded through me, so intense I nearly collapsed in my seat. 6 months. 6 months to help Sophie heal, to establish stability, to prove that love and safety were more important than status or wealth. As we left the courthouse, Richard Harrington approached us, his face tight with controlled rage. This isn't over, he said quietly. No one humiliates my family and gets away with it. I met his gaze steadily. This was never about your family's reputation. Mr. Harrington, it was about a little girl who deserved better than what she got. You have no idea who you're dealing with, he warned. Daniel stepped between us. Actually, she does. And so do I, finally. He looked at his father-in-law with something like pity. Your money can't fix this, Richard. Some things are beyond your control. As Richard stormed away, Daniel turned to me. I'm sorry, Mom, for everything. I took his hand. We have a long road ahead of us, but we're walking it together now. And for the first time in years, I truly believe that might be enough. Sophie's nightmares began 3 weeks after the court hearing. I would wake to her screams, rush to her bedroom and find her tangled in sheets damp with sweat, her small body curled tight as a fist. Don't put me in the dark, she would cry. Please, I'll be good. The child psychologist, Dr. Lin, explained that this was normal, even healthy. Now that Sophie feels safe, her mind is processing the trauma. The nightmares are her brain's way of making sense of what happened. I nodded, taking notes in the small spiral notebook I'd begun carrying everywhere. I wanted to do everything right, to be the guardian Sophie needed. At 68, I hadn't expected to be raising a child again, but each day brought new determination to meet the challenge. She asks about her mother, I told Dr. Lin during one session. She wants to know when she can see her. Dr. Lin nodded. That's also normal. No matter what Melissa did, Sophie still loves her. Children's love is remarkably resilient. Should I be arranging visits? The thought made my stomach clench, but I wanted to do what was best for Sophie. Not yet, Dr. Lin advised. Melissa hasn't completed her psychological evaluation or begun the court-ordered treatment. Until she does, any contact should be supervised and limited. Melissa had missed her first 2 evaluation appointments. According to Daniel, she'd moved back into her parents' home and rarely left, except to attend charity events where Barbara Harrington paraded her as the victim of a vindictive mother-in-law and an ungrateful husband. Daniel visited Sophie every other day. At first, their interactions were awkward. Sophie wary, Daniel unsure how to rebuild their relationship. But slowly, carefully, they found their way back to each other. He would read to her before bedtime, help with her homework, take her to the park where he'd played as a boy. "I remember when you were just learning to ride a bike," I told him one evening as we sat on my porch, watching Sophie chase fireflies in the yard. "You fell and skinned your knee so badly it needed stitches. But the next day you got right back on that bike. You've always been brave when it matters." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "I wasn't brave with Melissa. Or with her parents. I let them reshape me into someone I didn't recognize." "Why?" I asked, the question that had haunted me for years finally spoken aloud. "You never cared about money or status before." He sighed, running a hand through his hair, still that same gesture from childhood. At first, it was exciting. The vacations, the country club, the respect people showed when they heard I was Richard Harrington's son-in-law. It felt like I'd won something. He looked at me, shame evident in his eyes. Then it became about not losing it. Every compromise seemed small on its own. Give up Sunday dinners with you to attend the Harringtons' brunch. Stop correcting Melissa when she was harsh with Sophie because it would cause a scene. Accept Richard's job offer even though I hated the work. "Death by 1,000 cuts," I murmured. He nodded, until I couldn't recognize myself anymore. He watched Sophie, who had caught a firefly and was watching it glow in her cupped hands before releasing it. The worst part is that I taught her the same lesson that approval from the Harringtons was worth any sacrifice, even her own safety and happiness. A month after the custody hearing, Caroline Harrington came to visit again. She brought Sophie a stuffed fox. "Because they're clever and brave, just like you," and sat with us in the backyard while Sophie showed her the vegetable garden we'd planted together. "How are things with your family?" I asked quietly while Sophie was distracted. Caroline's smile was bittersweet. "About as you'd expect. My parents have stopped speaking to me entirely. Melissa alternates between crying and raging that I've ruined her life." "I'm sorry," I said, meaning it. "Family estrangement is never easy, even when it's necessary." She shrugged, but I could see the hurt beneath her casual demeanor. "I made my peace with their rejection years ago, but I couldn't let Sophie suffer the way I did." After Caroline left, Sophie asked me a question that caught me off guard. "Grandma, why does Mommy's family hate us?" I knelt down to her level, considering my words carefully. "They don't hate us, sweetheart. They're angry because things didn't go the way they wanted. People like your mother's parents are used to controlling everything and everyone around them. Like how Mommy tried to control me?" Her perception startled me. "Yes, something like that." Sophie picked at a loose thread on her shirt. "Mommy said I had to be perfect or people wouldn't love me." My heart broke anew. "Sophie, look at me." I waited until her eyes met mine. "Love isn't something you earn by being perfect. Real love accepts all of you, your mistakes, your messy moments, your bad days. Even when I spill things or forget to make my bed. Even then. Especially then." She considered this, her small face serious. "Daddy says he loves me even when he's sad about everything." "Your daddy does love you, very much, and he's working hard to be better at showing it." As spring turned to summer, our lives settled into a new rhythm. Sophie returned to school, now accompanied by Daniel each morning rather than the Harringtons' driver. I joined the school's volunteer committee, helping with library days and field trips. The other parents were welcoming, though I occasionally caught whispers about that custody situation with the Harringtons. One afternoon, as I waited to pick up Sophie, another grandmother approached me. "You're Eleanor Matthews, aren't you?" she asked. When I nodded, she continued, "I just wanted to say, well, what you did took courage. Standing up to the Harringtons like that?" I was taken aback. "You know them?" She gave a knowing smile. "Everyone in Maplewood knows the Harringtons. My daughter worked as their housekeeper for 3 years. The stories she could tell," she shook her head. "Let's just say you're not the first person they've tried to bully or silence." As she walked away, I realized something important. We weren't alone. For all their wealth and influence, the Harringtons hadn't managed to buy everyone's loyalty or silence. That evening, I received an unexpected call from Daniel. "Mom," he said, his voice tight with tension, "Melissa's agreed to the psychological evaluation. Her lawyer contacted mine today. She wants to start supervised visitation with Sophie." My grip tightened on the phone. "Why now? After months of refusing?" "I don't know. But her attorney mentioned that she's moved out of her parents' house. Got her own apartment." He paused. I think she might be serious about getting help." I wasn't sure I believed that. After all we'd seen and experienced, trust wouldn't come easily. But for Sophie's sake, I had to remain open to the possibility of change. What does Dr. Lin think? I asked. She says we should proceed cautiously. Start with very short visits, fully supervised by a court-appointed monitor. See how Sophie responds. I agreed, and the first visit was arranged for the following Saturday. Sophie was both excited and nervous, picking out her outfit 3 days in advance, then changing her mind a dozen times. What if Mommy doesn't like me anymore? She asked as I braided her hair the morning of the visit. Your mother loves you, I said, choosing my words with care. But sometimes adults have problems that make it hard for them to show love in the right ways. That's why she's getting help now. The visit took place at a neutral location, a family counseling center with a cheerful playroom and trained staff. Daniel and I waited in an adjoining room, watching through a one-way window as Melissa entered. She looked different, thinner, less polished. Her designer clothes replaced by simple jeans and a sweater. When Sophie ran to her, Melissa knelt down and embraced her, tears streaming down her face. I'm sorry, we heard her say through the monitoring system. I'm so sorry, baby. Daniel and I exchanged glances. Was this genuine remorse or another performance? Only time would tell. After the visit, Sophie was quiet on the drive home. When we arrived, she climbed onto my lap in the rocking chair that had become our special spot. Mommy said she's learning to be a better mommy, she told me. She said sometimes grown-ups need to learn lessons too. I stroked her hair. That's very true. Can she come to our house next time? The request was innocent, but it made my heart race with anxiety. My home had become our sanctuary, our safe place. The thought of Melissa within these walls brought back the fear and tension of those first awful days. But looking into Sophie's hopeful eyes, I knew what my answer had to be. We'll talk about it with Dr. Lin and see what she thinks. If everyone agrees it's a good next step, then yes, Mommy can visit us here. Sophie smiled and nestled against me. I think Mommy is learning the same lesson I did. What lesson is that, sweetheart? Her answer was simple but profound. That being perfect isn't as important as being kind. Out of the mouths of babes, I thought. If only the adults in her life had learned that lesson sooner. Autumn arrived with a blaze of color. The maple tree in my front yard turned a brilliant red, and Sophie collected its fallen leaves to press between the pages of her scrapbook. The air grew crisp, wood smoke scented the evenings, and we found ourselves halfway through the court's mandated 6-month custody period. On a bright October morning, Judge Martinez held a progress review hearing. Unlike the tense courtroom drama of our first appearance, this meeting took place in the judge's chambers. Daniel, myself, Sophie's guardian ad litem, Ms. Delgado, and Melissa with her new attorney, a more subdued woman who specialized in family reconciliation. Richard and Barbara Harrington were notably absent. According to Caroline, who had become a regular visitor and ally, they had retreated to their vacation home in the Hamptons, embarrassed by the public spectacle their family had become in Maplewood's tight-knit community. Judge Martinez reviewed the reports from Dr. Lin, the supervised visitation coordinator, and Sophie's teachers. She nodded approvingly as she read. I'm pleased with the progress being made, she said, looking up at all of us. Sophie is thriving academically and socially. Her anxiety symptoms have decreased significantly. And Mrs. Melissa Matthews, she turned to Melissa, your counselor reports consistent attendance and meaningful engagement in your treatment program. Melissa sat straighter, a cautious hope in her eyes. She looked remarkably different from the polished, cold woman who had dismissed her daughter's tears on Christmas Day. Her expensive highlights had grown out, revealing her natural brown hair. Her clothes were simple, practical. She wore no jewelry except a small pendant Sophie had made her from colored clay. Thank you, Your Honor, Melissa said quietly. I have a long way to go, but I'm committed to being the mother Sophie deserves. I studied her face, searching for signs of the old Melissa, the calculated charm, the hidden coldness. But all I saw was exhaustion, humility, and what appeared to be genuine remorse. The judge turned to me. Mrs. Eleanor Matthews, the court appreciates the stable and loving environment you've provided for your granddaughter during this difficult transition. Sophie's welfare has clearly been your priority throughout. She's my heart, I said simply. After reviewing the recommendations from all parties, Judge Martinez extended my temporary custody for another 3 months, but with an important modification. Melissa would now be allowed unsupervised visitation on weekends, building toward possible shared custody if progress continued. As we left the courthouse, Melissa approached me hesitantly. "Eleanor," she said, my name sounding strange on her lips after years of being called Mrs. Matthews in that dismissive tone. "Could we talk? Just the two of us?" Daniel looked concerned, but I nodded. "Why don't you take Sophie for ice cream? Melissa and I will meet you afterward." We walked to a small park across from the courthouse and sat on a bench beneath a canopy of golden leaves. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. "I don't expect you to forgive me," Melissa finally said, her gaze fixed on a distant point. "What I did to Sophie, what I allowed to happen, is unforgivable." "Then why are we having this conversation?" I asked, not unkindly. She turned to face me, her eyes red-rimmed but dry. "Because I need you to know that I see it now, all of it. How my parents shaped me into someone who valued appearance over substance. How I married Daniel not just because I loved him, but because he was everything they weren't: kind, genuine, unimpressed by wealth. And then I spent years trying to mold him into exactly what I'd been trying to escape." I listened without interrupting, remembering the bright, hopeful young woman Daniel had first introduced me to before the Harringtons' influence had fully taken hold. "My therapist says I have narcissistic tendencies," Melissa continued. "Learned from my parents. Reinforced by every privilege and advantage I've ever had." She twisted the simple gold band she still wore on her left hand. "I thought being a Harrington made me special. Better. I wanted Sophie to have that same confidence, but instead I taught her to fear failing, to believe love was conditional." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because you were right that day," she replied, her voice breaking. "When you found Sophie in the snow and said we'd lost the right to family." I had, she took a shaky breath. "And I want to earn it back. Not my parents' version of family based on control and perfection, but the kind you gave Daniel. The kind you're giving Sophie now." I thought of all the pain this woman had caused, the bruises on Sophie's arms, the terror in her eyes during nightmares, the way she'd flinch at sudden movements. Could someone capable of such cruelty truly change? "Change takes more than words, Melissa," I said finally. "It takes consistent action over time." "I know. That's why I'm not asking for your trust yet." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small envelope. "Just your witness." Inside the envelope was a lease agreement for an apartment 3 blocks from my house. Modest. Nothing like the Harrington estate, but clean and well-maintained in a family-friendly neighborhood. "I've taken a job at the community center," Melissa explained. "Teaching art classes. It doesn't pay much, but it's a start. My trust fund is still frozen, my parents' way of trying to force me back home, but I've sold most of my jewelry and designer clothes." She smiled faintly. "Turns out I don't need 4 designer handbags to be happy." I raised an eyebrow. "And your parents? How do they feel about their daughter becoming common?" "They're horrified," she admitted. "My mother keeps sending me listings for appropriate condos and job openings at her friends' foundations. My father hasn't spoken to me directly in months, just through his assistant or lawyer." She shrugged. "But for the first time in my life, I'm making choices based on what I need, not what they expect." I wasn't ready to fully believe in Melissa's transformation. The wounds were too fresh, the memories too vivid. But I recognized the courage it took to break free from the Harringtons' influence. I'd watched Daniel struggle with the same battle. "Sophie needs stability," I said. "She needs to know the adults in her life are reliable, consistent." "I know. That's why I'm not pushing for full custody right away. I need to prove myself to Sophie, to the court, to you." Melissa hesitated. "And to myself." As we walked to meet Daniel and Sophie, I found myself reflecting on the strange journey that had brought us here. From that frozen Christmas day to this golden autumn afternoon. From enemies to what? Not friends, certainly. Not yet, perhaps not ever. But 2 women united by love for the same child. "Eleanor," Melissa said as we approached the ice cream shop where Sophie was happily devouring a chocolate cone. "Thank you. Not for forgiving me, but for loving her enough to fight for her when no one else would." I watched Sophie laugh at something Daniel said. Chocolate smeared on her chin, her eyes bright with an innocence that had been temporarily dimmed but never fully extinguished. "I didn't do it to hurt you, Melissa," I said honestly. "I did it because it was right," she nodded. "That's the lesson I'm trying to learn now." The weeks that followed brought gradual, careful changes to our unusual family arrangement. Melissa moved into her new apartment and began hosting Sophie for day visits, then overnight stays. Daniel, now working at a small financial advisory firm that paid less but aligned better with his values, continued his own healing journey through therapy and parenting classes. And I found myself in an unexpected role, not just Sophie's guardian, but a kind of mentor to both my son and his estranged wife as they relearned how to parent with kindness and boundaries. The first real test came as Thanksgiving approached. Sophie asked if we could all celebrate together. "You mean Daddy and Mommy and you?" I clarified. She nodded earnestly. "And Aunt Caroline, too." Like a real family, the thought of sharing a holiday meal with Melissa still made me uneasy. But Sophie's hopeful expression melted my resistance. "I think that might be possible," I said carefully. "Let me talk with your parents." To my surprise, both Daniel and Melissa agreed readily to the plan. Caroline, who had found her own measure of peace in reconnecting with her niece, offered to bring dessert. "A year ago, I never would have imagined this," Daniel told me as we prepared the turkey the night before Thanksgiving. "The four of us at the same table, without the Harringtons controlling everything." "Life takes unexpected turns," I replied, thinking of how different things might have been if I hadn't driven to their house that Christmas day, if I hadn't found Sophie in the snow. The Thanksgiving meal itself was awkward at times, with conversation occasionally stalling into uncomfortable silence. But there were also moments of genuine warmth. Sophie proudly showing Melissa the place cards she'd made for everyone. Caroline and Daniel reminiscing about childhood Thanksgivings before the family tensions grew so severe. Melissa complimenting my cranberry sauce recipe and asking if I would teach her to make it. As we finished our pumpkin pie, Sophie looked around the table with satisfaction. "This is nice," she declared. "Everyone's being kind to each other, out of the mouths of babes indeed, later." As Daniel and Caroline washed dishes and Sophie showed Melissa her latest art project, I stepped outside for a moment of quiet reflection. The night was clear and cold, stars sharp as diamonds above the bare branches of the maple tree. My phone buzzed with a text message. "Unknown number. You've won this round, Eleanor. Enjoy it while it lasts. Richard Harrington." I stared at the message, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the November air. Then I deleted it without responding and went back inside to my family, my real family, bound by love and shared healing, not by wealth or status or fear. Whatever Richard Harrington was planning, we would face it together. Christmas approached, bringing with it a swirl of emotions. 1 year since I'd found Sophie abandoned in the snow. 1 year since our lives had changed irrevocably. Sophie, ever sensitive to the undercurrents around her, grew increasingly anxious as December progressed. "What if something bad happens again?" she asked one evening as we decorated our small tree with the handmade ornaments she'd been creating at school. "Something bad won't happen," I assured her, though the text from Richard Harrington still lingered in my mind. "This Christmas will be very different." "Because Mommy and Daddy are better now?" I hung a glittering paper star on a branch and smiled. "Yes, and because we're all wiser than we were before." Sophie seemed satisfied with this answer, but I continued to worry. Richard and Barbara Harrington had been ominously quiet since their daughter's defection from the family fold. Caroline warned us that they were likely regrouping, planning their next move. "My father doesn't lose gracefully," she told me over coffee one afternoon. "He sees Sophie as a Harrington legacy. He won't just let her go." My concern deepened when Daniel called, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Dad just called me. Apparently, the Harringtons are hosting their annual Christmas Eve party and want Sophie to attend." "Just Sophie, not me, not you, not even Melissa." "What did you tell him?" I said absolutely not. Then Richard got on the phone. Daniel took a shaky breath. "He offered me my old job back, at double the salary. Said all I had to do was bring Sophie to the party and start rebuilding relationships with the right people." My stomach nodded. "What did you say?" "I told him Sophie isn't a bargaining chip. Then he said something about how custody arrangements can always be reviewed, especially when one party can provide significant financial advantages." I clutched the phone tighter. "He's threatening us. He's trying to. But we have the court order, the evidence of past abuse. He can't just sweep that away with money." But we both knew that wasn't entirely true. Money couldn't erase what had happened, but it could certainly influence what happened next. Richard Harrington's connections extended to judges, lawyers, politicians, anyone whose career could benefit from alignment with his wealth and influence. As Christmas Eve approached, another complication arose. Melissa came to my house, her expression troubled. "My parents sent this," she said, handing me a thick envelope. Inside was a formal invitation to their Christmas Eve party, addressed to Melissa and Sophie only, along with a handwritten note from Barbara. "Darling, it's time to end this nonsense. Your father and I are prepared to be magnanimous. Return home where you belong, bring Sophie, and we'll ensure your financial security is restored. Everyone makes mistakes in parenting. It's time to put this unfortunate episode behind us and reunite our family properly." "They're pretending nothing happened," Melissa said, her voice hollow. As if Sophie wasn't abused. As if I didn't need help. As if it was all just a minor misunderstanding. I studied her face, searching for any sign that she was tempted by her mother's offer. Financial security. Social standing. The comfort of denial. And what do you want to do? I asked carefully. Melissa straightened her shoulders. "I want to spend Christmas Eve here, with Sophie and Daniel and you, if you'll have me. I want to keep attending therapy. I want to continue working at the community center, where I'm teaching art to children who remind me daily why kindness matters more than perfection." Her voice grew stronger with each statement. "I want to be the mother Sophie deserves, not the daughter my parents demanded." Relief washed through me. "Then that's what we'll do." But Richard Harrington had one more card to play. 2 days before Christmas, a courier delivered documents to both Daniel and me. Legal papers filed with the family court, seeking to overturn our custody arrangement on the grounds that the Harringtons could provide superior financial resources and educational opportunities for their granddaughter. The hearing was set for December 26th, the day after Christmas. "They're trying to ruin our holiday," Daniel said when he called, fury evident in his voice. "To keep us off balance, distracted, or to tempt us into doing something rash," I suggested. "Don't let them provoke you, Daniel. That's exactly what they want." We consulted with our attorney, who assured us that the Harringtons' petition had little chance of success given the documented history of abuse and the positive progress reports from Sophie's therapist and social workers. But the timing was deliberate and cruel, a reminder that they still held power, still controlled the narrative in their circles. On Christmas Eve, as the snow fell gently outside my windows, we gathered in my small living room, Daniel, Melissa, Caroline, Sophie, and me. The tree glowed with white lights. Presents wrapped in recycled paper clustered beneath it. The scent of cinnamon and pine filled the air. Sophie had insisted we leave cookies for Santa, even though she'd recently begun questioning his existence. "Better safe than sorry," she'd said with such adult seriousness that we'd all hidden smiles. As we sat down to our modest dinner, the doorbell rang. My heart dropped. Had the Harringtons decided to make a personal appearance to pressure Melissa? Daniel went to answer, his expression wary. I heard murmured conversation, then he returned with an unexpected guest, Mrs. Chen, Sophie's court-appointed guardian. "I'm sorry to intrude on your family celebration," she said, shaking snow from her coat. "But I received some concerning information this afternoon and wanted to speak with you all in person." We invited her to join us, anxiety tightening around the holiday cheer we'd been nurturing. The Harringtons approached Judge Martinez directly, Mrs. Chen explained after declining our offer of food. They suggested that the custody arrangement was causing Sophie educational disadvantages. They've offered to establish a trust fund for her education contingent on custody being transferred to them. "They can't just buy a child," I protested. Mrs. Chen smiled slightly. Judge Martinez had a similar response. She was not pleased with their attempt to circumvent proper legal channels. "So their petition," Daniel began, "has been dismissed," Mrs. Chen confirmed. "Furthermore, the judge has extended your current arrangement for another full year. Mrs. Matthews with graduated increases in parental visitation rights as long as both parents continue their respective treatment programs." The relief in the room was palpable. Sophie, who had been listening intently despite our attempts to shield her from adult concerns, broke into a wide smile. "So I get to stay with Grandma? And still see Mommy and Daddy?" Mrs. Chen nodded. "That's right, Sophie. The judge thinks you're doing very well with this arrangement." After Mrs. Chen left, promising to return with the official papers after the holiday, our celebration took on a deeper meaning. Not just Christmas, but freedom from the shadow that had been hanging over us since Richard's threatening text. As we opened presents, modest gifts chosen with thought rather than extravagance, I watched Sophie's face light up with each discovery. A set of watercolors from Melissa, a telescope from Daniel, a hand-knit sweater and journal from me, Simple treasures that represented love, not status. Later, as Sophie slept and the adults sat by the fire, Melissa raised her mug of hot chocolate in a toast. "To Eleanor," she said, her voice soft but steady. "Who taught me what real family means?" Daniel and Caroline echoed the toast, their faces warm in the firelight. I thought of how far we'd come in 1 year. Daniel finding his backbone and his values again. Melissa breaking free from toxic patterns learned in childhood. Caroline rebuilding a relationship with her niece. Sophie learning that love didn't require perfection. And me finding strength I didn't know I had, a voice I'd kept silent for too long. On Christmas morning, Sophie woke us all at dawn, bouncing with excitement. As she distributed the last few presents, she handed me a small package, wrapped in newspaper and decorated with too much tape. "I made it myself," she said. Proudly, inside was a clay ornament for the tree, a simple house with 5 figures standing before it, their hands connected in a chain. "It's us," Sophie explained. "Our family." I hung it on the tree, my heart full beyond measure. "It's perfect," I told her. Later that day, as Sophie played with her new telescope and the adults prepared dinner, my phone buzzed with a text. I expected it to be from Mrs. Chen with details about the custody papers. Instead, it was from Richard Harrington. "This isn't over." I studied the message for a moment, then showed it to Daniel and Melissa. They exchanged glances, concern evident in their expressions. "What should we do?" Melissa asked. I looked through the kitchen doorway to where Sophie sat by the window, her face alight with discovery as she focused her telescope on the winter birds visiting our garden. She was safe. She was loved. She was healing. I deleted the message and put my phone away. "We'll do what we've been doing," I said simply. "Love her. Protect her. Show her what real family means. And if my father keeps trying to interfere," Melissa pressed. I thought of the journey we'd taken this past year, the pain, the growth, the unexpected alliances formed through shared purpose. "Then we'll face it together," I replied. "Some people use power to control. Others use love to liberate. I know which kind of power I believe in." As we gathered around the table that evening, I looked at our unlikely family formed not by blood or wealth or social connections, but by choice and courage and forgiveness. 1 year ago, I had kicked open a door and spoken 6 words that changed everything. "You lost the right to family." Now I understood that family isn't something you're entitled to by birth or marriage. It's something you earn through love, respect, and unwavering commitment to each other's welfare. Something you build day by day, choice by choice. Sophie raised her glass of sparkling cider. "Merry Christmas to our family," she said, her smile lighting up the room. "To our family," we echoed, our glasses touching in the warm glow of Christmas lights. Outside, snow continued to fall, covering everything in a blanket of pure white. Not a prison of cold isolation like last year, but a clean slate. A fresh beginning. Together, we would write the next chapter.